Hello, this is Morel Benard with the continuation of the story, David Copperfield. Last time, what was said was that all the boys were at their several homes. Mr. Kriegel, the proprietor, was down by the seaside with Mrs. and Miss Kriegel, and that I was sent in holiday time as a punishment for my misdoing. All of which he explained to me as we went along. And as I proceed, please subscribe to Study Coach UK channel. Please subscribe and please share. So let me continue with the story of David Copperfield. I gazed upon the schoolroom into which he took me as the most forlorn and desolate place I had ever seen. I see it now. A long room with 3 long rows of desks and 6 of forms, and bristling all round with pegs for hats and slates. Scraps of old copybooks and exercises litter the dirty floor. Some silkworms' houses made of the same materials are scattered over the desk. 2 miserable little white mice, left behind by their owner, are running up and down in a fusty castle made of pasteboard and wire, looking in all the corners with their red eyes for anything to eat. A bird in a cage, very little, bigger than myself, making a mournful rattle now and then, and hopping on his perch, 2 inches high, or dropping from it, but neither sings nor chirps. There is a strange, unwholesome smell upon the room, like mildewed corduroys, sweet apples wanting air, and rotten books. There could not well be more ink splashed about it, if it had been roofless from its first construction, and the skies had rained, snowed, hailed, and blown ink through the varying seasons of the year. Mr. Mell, having left me while he took his irreparable boots upstairs, I went softly to the upper end of the room, observing all this as I crept along. Suddenly I came upon a pasteboard placard beautifully written, which was lying on the desk, and bore these words: "Take care of him. He bites." I got upon the desk immediately, apprehensive of at least a great dog underneath. But though I looked all round with anxious eyes, I could see nothing of him. I was still engaged in peering about when Mr. Mell came back and asked me what I did up there. "I beg your pardon, sir," said I. "If you please, I'm looking for the dog." "Dog?" he says. "What dog?" "Isn't it a dog, sir?" "Isn't what a dog?" "That's to be taken care of, sir, that bites." "No, Copperfield," said he gravely. "That's not a dog. That's a boy. My instructions are, Copperfield, to put this placard on your back. I'm sorry to make such a beginning with you, but I must do it." With that he took me down, and tied the placard, which was neatly constructed for the purpose, on my shoulders like a knapsack, and wherever I went afterwards, I had the consolation of carrying it. What I suffered from that placard, nobody can imagine. Whether it was possible for people to see me or not, I always fancied that somebody was reading it. It was no relief to turn round and find nobody, for whenever my back was, there I imagined somebody always to be. That cruel man with the wooden leg aggravated my sufferings. He was in authority, and if ever saw me leaning against a tree or a wall or the house, he roared out from his lodge door, in a stupendous voice, "Hello, you, sir! You, Copperfield! Show that badge conspicuous or I'll report you." The playground was a bare, gravelled yard, open to all the back of the house and the offices, and I knew that the servants read it, and the butcher read it, and the baker read it, that everybody, in a word, who came backwards and forwards to the house of a morning when I was ordered to walk there, read that I was to be taken care of, for I bit. I recollect that I positively began to have a dread of myself as a kind of wild boy who did bite. There was an old door in this playground, on which the boys had a custom of carving their names. It was completely covered with such inscriptions. In my dread of the end of the vacation and their coming back, I could not read a boy's name without inquiring in what tone and with what emphasis he would read. "Take care of him, he bites." There was one boy, a certain J. Steerforth, who cut his name very deep and very often, who I conceived would read it in a rather strong voice and afterwards pulled my hair. There was another boy, one Tommy Traddles, who I dreaded would make game of it and pretend to be dreadfully frightened of me. There was a third, George Demple, who I fancied would sing it. I have looked, a little shrinking creature, at that door until the owners of all the names, there were 45 of them in the school then, Mr. Mell said, seemed to send me to Coventry by general acclamation and to cry out, each in his own way, "Take care of him, he bites." It was the same at the places at the desk and forms. It was the same with the groves of deserted bedstead I peeped at on my way to, and when I was in my own bed. I remember dreaming night after night of being with my mother as she used to be, or of going to a party at Mr. Peggoty's, or of travelling outside the stage coach, or of dining again with my unfortunate friend the waiter, and in all these circumstances making people scream and stare by the unhappy disclosure that I had nothing on but my little nightshirt and that placard. In the monotony of my life, and in my constant apprehension of the reopening of the school, it was such an insupportable affliction. I had long tasks every day to do with Mr. Mell, but I did them, there being no Mr. and Miss Murdstone there, and got through them without disgrace. Before and after them, I walked about supervised, as I have mentioned, by the man with the wooden leg. How vividly I call to mind the damp about the house, the green cracked flagstones in the court, and old leaky water butt, and the discoloured trunks of some of the grim trees which seemed to have dripped more in the rain than other trees, and to have blown less in the sun. At one we dined, Mr. Mell and I, at the upper end of a long, bare dining room, full of deal tables and smelling of fat. Then we had more task until tea, which Mr. Mell drank out of a blue teacup and I out of a tin pot. All day long, and until 7 or 8 in the evening, Mr. Mell, at his own detached desk in the schoolroom, worked hard with pen ink, ruler, books, and writing paper, making out the bills, as I found, for last year. When he had put up his things for the night, he took out his flute and blew at it, until I almost thought he would gradually blow his whole being into the large hole at the top and ooze away at the keys. I pictured my small self in the dimly lighted rooms, sitting with my head upon my hand, listening to the doleful performance of Mr. Mell, and cunning tomorrow's lessons. I picture myself with my book shut up, still listening to the doleful performance of Mr. Mell, and listening through it to what used to be at home, and to the blowing of the wind on Yarmouth Flats, and feeling very sad and solitary. I picture myself going up to bed, among the unused rooms, and sitting on my bedside crying for a comfortable word from Peggoty. I picture myself coming downstairs in the morning and looking through a long, ghastly gash of a staircase window at the school bell hanging on the top of outside with a weathercock above it, and dreading the time when it shall ring. J. Steerforth and the rest to work, which is only second in my foreboding apprehensions to the time when the man with the wooden leg shall unlock the rusty gate to give admission to the awful Mr. Kriegel. I cannot think I was a very dangerous character in any of these aspects, but in all of them I carry the same warning on my back. Mr. Mell never said much to me, but he was never harsh to me. I suppose we were company to each other without talking. I forgot to mention that he would talk to himself sometimes, and grin and clench his fist and grind his teeth and pull his hair in an unaccountable manner. But he had these peculiarities, and at first they frightened me, though I soon got used to them. I had led this life about a month, when the man with the wooden leg began to stump about with a mop and a bucket of water, from which I inferred that preparations were making to receive Mr. Kriegel and the boys. I was not mistaken, for the mop came into the schoolroom before long, and turned out Mr. Mell and me, who lived where we could, and got on how we could for some days, during which we were always in the way of 2 or 3 young women who had rarely shown themselves before, and were so continually in the midst of dust that I sneezed almost as much as if Salem House had been a great snuff box. One day I was informed by Mr. Mell that Mr. Kriegel would be home that evening. In the evening after tea, I heard that he was come. Before bedtime I was fetched by the man with the wooden leg to appear before him. Mr. Kriegel's part of the house was a good deal more comfortable than ours, and he had a snug bit of garden that looked pleasant out of the dusty playground, which was such a desert in miniature that I thought no one but a camel or a dromedary could have felt at home in it. It seemed to me a bold thing even to take notice that the passage looked comfortable as I went on my way, trembling to Mr. Kriegel's presence, which so abashed me when I was ushered into it that I hardly saw Mrs. Kriegel or Miss Kriegel, who were both there in the parlour, or anything but Mr. Kriegel, a stout gentleman with a bunch of watch chain and seals in an armchair, with a tumbler and bottle beside him. "So," said Mr. Kriegel, This is the young gentleman whose teeth are to be filed. Turn him round." The wooden-legged man turned me about so as to exhibit the placard, and having afforded time for a full survey of it, turned me about again with my face to Mr. Kriegel, and posted himself at Mr. Kriegel's side. Mr. Kriegel's face was fairy, and his eyes were small, and deep in his head. He had thick veins in his forehead, a little nose, and a large chin. He was bald on the top of his head, and had some thin, wet-looking hair that was just turning grey, brushed across each temple so that the two sides interlaced on his forehead. But the circumstance about him which impressed me most was that he had no voice, but spoke in a whisper. The exertion this cost him, or the consciousness of talking in that feeble way, made his angry face so much more angry, and his thick veins so much thicker, when he spoke, that I was not surprised, on looking back, at this peculiarity striking me as his chief one. "Now," said Mr. Kriegel, "what's the report of this boy?" "There's nothing against him yet," returned the man with the wooden leg. "There has been no opportunity." I thought Mr. Kriegel was disappointed. I thought Mrs. and Miss Kriegel, at whom I now glanced for the first time, and who were both thin and quiet, were not disappointed. "Come here, sir," said Mr. Kriegel, beckoning to me. "Come here," said the man with the wooden leg, repeating the gesture. "I have the happiness of knowing your father-in-law," whispered Mr. Kriegel, taking me by the ear. "And a worthy man he is, and a man of a strong character. He knows me, and I know him. Do you know me? Hey?" said Mr. Kriegel, pinching my ear with ferocious playfulness. "Not yet, sir," I said, flinching with the pain. "Not yet, eh?" repeated Mr. Kriegel. "But you will soon, hey? You will soon, hey?" repeated the man with the wooden leg. I afterwards found that he generally acted with his strong voice as Mr. Kriegel's interpreter to the boys. I was very much frightened, and said I hoped so, if he pleased. I felt all this while as if my ear were blazing. He pinched it so hard. "I'll tell you what I am," whispered Mr. Kriegel, letting it go at last with a screw at parting that brought the water into my eyes. "I'm a Tartar." "A Tartar," said the man with the wooden leg. "When I say I'll do a thing, I'll do it," said Mr. Kriegel. "And when I say I will have a thing done, I will have it done." "Will have a thing done, I will have it done," repeated the man with the wooden leg. "I am a determined character," said Mr. Kriegel. "That's what I am. I do my duty. That's what I do. My flesh and blood." He looked at Mrs. Kriegel as he said this. "When it rises against me, it is not my flesh and blood. I discard it. Has that fellow," to the man with the wooden leg, "been here again?" "No," was the answer. "No," said Mr. Kriegel. "He knows better. He knows me. Let him keep away. I say let him keep away," said Mr. Kriegel, striking his hand upon the table and looking at Mrs. Kriegel, "for he knows me. Now you have begun to know me too, my young friend, and you may go. Take him away." I was very glad to be ordered away, for Mrs. and Miss Kriegel were both wiping their eyes, and I felt as uncomfortable for them as I did for myself. But I had a petition on my mind which concerned me so nearly that I couldn't help saying, though I wondered at my own courage, "If ye please, sir." Mr. Kriegel whispered, "Ah, what's this?" and bent his eyes upon me as if he would have burned me up with them. "If you please, sir," I faltered. "If I might be allowed." "I'm very sorry indeed, sir, for what I did. To take this writing off before the boys come back." Whether Mr. Kriegel was in earnest or whether he only did it to frighten me, I don't know, but he made a burst out of his chair, before which I precipitately retreated, without waiting for the escort of the man with the wooden leg, and never once stopped until I reached my own bedroom, where, finding I was not pursued, I went to bed, as it was time, and lay quaking for a couple of hours. Next morning, Mr. Sharp came back. Mr. Sharp was the first master and superior to Mr. Mell. Mr. Mell took his meals with the boys, but Mr. Sharp dined and supped at Mr. Kriegel's table. He was a limp, delicate-looking gentleman, I thought, with a good deal of nose and a way of carrying his head on one side, as if it were a little too heavy for him. His hair was very smooth and wavy, but I was informed by the very first boy who came back that it was a wig, a second-hand one, he said, and that Mr. Sharp went out every Saturday afternoon to get it curled. It was no other than Tommy Traddles who gave me this piece of intelligence. He was the first boy who returned. He introduced himself by informing me that I should find his name on the right-hand corner of the gate, over the top bolt. Upon that I said, "Traddles," to which he replied, "The same." And then he asked me for a full account of myself and family. It was a happy circumstance for me that Traddles came back first. He enjoyed my placard so much that he saved me from the embarrassment of either disclosure or concealment by presenting me to every other boy who came back, great or small, immediately on his arrival, in this form of introduction. "Look here, here's a game." Happily, too, the greater part of the boys came back slow-spirited, and were not so boisterous at my expense as I had expected. Some of them certainly did dance about me like wild Indians, and the greater part could not resist the temptation of pretending that I was a dog, and patting and soothing me, lest I should bite, and saying, "Lie down, sir," and calling me Towser. This was naturally confusing among so many strangers and cost me some tears. But on the whole it was much better than I had anticipated. I was not considered as being formally received into the school, however, until J. Steerforth arrived. Before this boy, who was reputed to be a great scholar, and was very good-looking, and at least half a dozen years my senior, I was carried, as before, a magistrate. He inquired, under a shed in the playground, into the particulars of my punishment, and was pleased to express his opinion that it was a jolly shame, for which I became bound to him ever afterwards. "What money have you got, Copperfield?" he said. walking aside with me when he had disposed of my affair in these terms. I told him 7 shillings. "You had better give it to me to take care of," he said. "At least you can if you like. You needn't if you don't like." I hastened to comply with his friendly suggestion, and opening Peggoty's purse, turned it upside down into his hand. "Do you want to spend anything now?" he asked me. "No, thank you," I replied. "You can if you like, you know," said Steerforth. "Say the word." "No, thank you, sir," I repeated. "Perhaps you'd like to spend a couple of shillings or so in a bottle of currant wine by and by, up in the bedroom," said Steerforth. "You belong to my bedroom, I find." It certainly had not occurred to me before, but I said, "Yes, I should like that." "Very good," said Steerforth. "You'll be glad to spend another shilling or so in almond cakes, I dare say." I said, "Yes, I should like that too." "And another shilling or so in biscuits, and another in fruit, eh?" said Steerforth. I say, "Young Copperfield, you're going it?" I smiled because he smiled, but I was a little troubled in my mind too. "Well," said Steerforth, "we must make it stretch as far as we can, that's all. I'll do the best in my power for you. I can go out when I like, and I'll smuggle the prog in." With these words, he put the money in his pocket and kindly told me not to make myself uneasy. He would take care it should be all right. He was as good as his word, if that were all right, which I had a secret misgiving was nearly all wrong, for I feared it was a waste of my mother's 2 half-crowns, though I had persevered the piece of paper they were wrapped in, which was a precious saving. When we went upstairs to bed, he produced the whole 7 shillings worth and laid it on my bed in the moonlight, saying, "There you are, young Copperfield, and a royal spread you've got." I couldn't think of doing the honours of the feast at my time of life while he was by. My hand shook at the very thought of it. I begged him to do me the favour of presiding, and my request being seconded by the other boys who were in that room, he acceded to it, and sat upon my pillow, handing round the viands with perfect fairness, I must say, and dispensing the currant wine in a little glass without a foot, which was his own property. As to me, I sat on his left hand, and the rest were grouped about us, on the nearest beds and on the floor. How well I recollect our sitting there, talking in whispers, or their talking, and my respectfully listening. I ought rather to say, the moonlight falling a little way into the room through the window, painting a pale window on the floor, and the greater part of us in shadow, except when Steerforth dipped a match into a phosphorus box when he wanted to look for anything on the board, and shed a blue glare over us that was gone directly. A certain mysterious feeling, consequent on the darkness, the secrecy of the revel, and the whisper in which everything was said, steals over me again, and I listen to all they tell me with a vague feeling of solemnity and awe, which makes me glad that they are all so near, and frightens me, though I feign to laugh when Traddles pretends to see a ghost in the corner. Join me, Morel Benard, for the next video, the next episode of David Copperfield. And don't forget, please, don't forget to subscribe. Join me for the next video of David Copperfield. I'll see you then. Bye.